Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you had a great holiday weekend. Many of you were among the millions of Americans who enjoyed an extended break with the company of family and friends. But the real reason we honor Memorial Day is to remember those who faithfully served our country, no matter the cost. Veterans around the country are working to make sure we honor these sacrifices every day. We're joined by Miguel Reece, a retired U.S. Air Force major and author of the internationally best-selling book, The Disabled Veteran's Story, The Sacrifices of Our Veterans and Their Families. Well, first and foremost, thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you very much for acknowledging. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. You're in the Charleston area because you're having a book signing, which we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But now you, first of all, how did you spend your Memorial Day?
At Charleston Air Force Base, I had a book signing there from yesterday morning at 10 o'clock until 5. And then I went out to dinner and celebrated the precious moment.
And it is a precious moment.
Yes, ma'am.
You fought in Vietnam. You've seen a lot of war in your military career. It doesn't stop once you take the uniform off, so now you're living the civilian lifestyle, but you're still telling those stories.
Yes, ma'am. I was asked to tell the story. I used to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs as an investigator, and the families, the veterans, and the caretakers asked me to tell the stories. They said, find a platform to share their stories, share the chapters in our history. And that's what I've done, and it's wonderful.
And I want to get into those individual stories in just a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about you. Now, you fought in Vietnam. What was that experience like for you?
Well, the experience in Vietnam was very interesting, traumatic per se, but I think the worst part of coming back from Vietnam was the hardest part of it. How we were treated was tough. And I ended up with a trophy, which is prostate cancer and diabetes and all those other things that, that goes with it. And that's why my book is called The Disabled Veteran's Stories, because I'm a Vietnam prostate cancer survivor.
And this is a common problem that a lot of your comrades have dealt with, are dealing with today. Because of whatever they've been exposed to.
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange. And the assistance or lack thereof from Veterans Affairs. Now, there's a story in your book about that specifically, is there not?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. I believe that the VA can do a little bit more, to support the veterans. And I just kind of find it hard to talk about that. It really is. For me, it's an emotional issue. So I just prefer if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. But I think it's important for people to understand, and maybe that with that understanding, compassion will grow from that, and through the compassion, things will eventually change.
Well, I believe that what they need to do is to focus on the reality of life. The reality of life is not about numbers, it's more about service. And the VA is predicated, I believe, both on numbers. It's not what you do, it's how much you do. And you get your awards and you get your bonuses based in the numbers. And I believe if the focus is changed, it would really help.
I don't think a lot of people even realize that that's how it works.
Right.
Now, you were born near the Panama Canal. You were born, a little interesting fact, you were born in the same hospital as who?
John McCain.
It's John McCain.
Yes.
And so you both fought in wars. How old were you when you were first deployed?
How old was I when I was first deployed? Well, first off, I got drafted in 1968, and I didn't show up for the draft. I enlisted in the Air Force, and then I lived and visited 29 countries in the world since I enlisted.
And when you first started, how old were you?
Let's see, I went to Michigan State initially, and so I was 19 years old.
19, so you
Right.
were just a boy
Right.
at that age.
Right.
And you've seen a lot of different countries, as you just mentioned. Vietnam, you also were in the Balkans, the Middle East.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, wars are all very different. So what were some of the most obvious differences between, say, Vietnam, the Middle East, what was happening in the Balkans?
What was happening in the Balkans really is kind of sort of had put a tough twist on my life, because in the Balkan it was more about ethnic cleansing, and I was an expedition force medical commander, And it was kind of interesting because people talk at me instead of talk to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a break. We do need to take a break, but when we come back, Major is going to share more about his book and where you can buy a copy, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been speaking with retired Air Force Major Miguel Reece, a Vietnam veteran and prostate cancer survivor. He wrote an international best-selling book detailing stories of service members and their families who endured more than combat. And so that is a big part of your book, is that the families who are left behind, they have their own battles.
Yes, ma'am.
So maybe tell me some stories that you have in your book.
One of the great stories that I talked about, or I had the privilege of understanding, was the mom who followed her, the spouse who followed her, the veteran, around to 9 different places. And every time she went from place to place, she had to got a new job, start over again, or started from the bottom. And she was an educator, but she was never able to use her education to achieve what she needed. But their daughter, who went to 10 schools in 12 years, never learned how to trust. It was tough on her. When I saw her, she said that she was engaged, but she didn't know how to trust because, you know, every time you went from place to place, you make new friends. And back in those days, they call it peer pressure, and today they call it bullying. So it was really, really tough. And or the spouse that had to decide on her career, whether she wanted her career or she wanted to have her son. And she had to give up her career for her son.
Wow. So it's just a feeling of being uprooted and constantly moving and never finding that comfort of friends that you can confide in or know that you're going to see them the following year. So that really has a devastating effect. And so these are the sacrifices that I think a lot of people don't even realize exist. It's not just when you put on the uniform and go fight in a war, but it's really what's happening back here at home.
Right. And we believe that the war doesn't end on a battlefield. The war doesn't end in a theater of conflict. It continues. For example, a living example of those individuals sitting on street corners saying that they'll work for food. They're hearing voices no one else hears. They're seeing things that no one else sees. And oftentimes people kind of sort of scorn them. Right? I mean, like, if you see an individual in the street corner, can you look him in the eye or her in the eye? Or we kind of sympathize with them and try to empathize. But how can you empathize if you can't smell that smell? Because oftentimes when you smell that smell, you taste that thing that's in your mouth because you have experienced that, you have lived it, and you can't help that voice. And you see them talking to themselves. It's because those voices is telling them a lot of things.
And does that go back to Veterans Affairs and them doing a better job in the future to help support those issues when people come back from war?
Well, I believe it's not believe. The fact of the matter, in a lot of cases, is because these individuals, because of their medical condition, they hear these voices and it affects them, and a lot of times they get bad conduct discharges, and if you get a bad conduct discharge, you're entitled to benefits. So, but I believe the law needs to review that again, because it's, like I was sharing earlier about the cause of the condition. It may not have caused it, but it aggravates it.
And when did you decide that you wanted to finally write this book, that you wanted to compile these stories?
Well, after I retired, after my 30 years in the military, I went to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I was an investigator, adjudicator, and the veterans and their families said, you have to tell my story. Find a chapter in my life, find a chapter in your life to share this story. Find an avenue to share your story. Matter of fact, the first story was about a guy who was a prisoner of war for 3 years and 7 months, and he gave me a copy of his journal. And he said, you have to tell my story. Or the last story in my book about the mom who's fighting the VA for her son entitled benefit.
Right, so you really are the voice of so many people. Well, Major, thank you so much. And we're gonna have all the information on the book signing when that's taking place all the way through Saturday, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful.
At Charleston.
At Charleston, Joint Base Charleston.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we'll have that information on our website, foxcharleston.com. We're back after this.